and welcome to Queer Theory Chronicles episode 2. So today we're going to be talking about something else that we covered in my queer theory class, but this time it's going to be more focused on the discussion we actually had in class, because we read an article, and I'll tell you what the article was about, and I'll read a couple pieces from it, but a lot of, let's say, confrontation occurred when we started having a discussion that kind of hinged upon this but wasn't completely focused on the article. So, this article is called Trans, or Transgender, and it's from the Women's Studies Quarterly. I'm going to read one of their introduction paragraphs. Our call for papers read trans, gender, national, racial, generational, genic, species. The list could and does go on. The species issues of Women's Studies Quarterly invites feminist work that explores categorical crossings, leakages, and slips of all sorts around and through the concept of trans. While gender certainly, perhaps inevitably, remains a primary analytical category for the work we ought to accomplish in this feminist scholarly journal, our aim in curating this special issue specifically was not to identify, consolidate, or stabilize category or class of people, things, or phenomena that could be denominated trans, as if certain concrete somethings could be characterized as crossers, while everything else could be characterized by boundedness and fixity. It seems especially important to insist upon this point when addressing transgender phenomena. So when everyone in our class got to this point of the reading, I'm pretty sure everyone was like, okay, so what the fuck did we just read? Which is pretty relatable. So people in our class were presenting about this, because every week we have someone who has to present, and fun fact, I'm presenting next week, so God knows how that'll go. But anyways, the people presenting went ahead and explained that their personal take on this article was that the term trans has been assigned to transgender people, and what the article is trying to argue is that the term trans should be broadened and have blurrier edges, so when we say trans, we're not only referring to transgender people, but maybe we're referring to transnational, transgenerational, transgenic, trans species. And they even include transracial, which I'm sure they have a problem with, but it was kind of funny that they included that anyways. So they kind of want to complicate the meaning of trans, which I think is a terrible idea. Why wouldn't you look for another word instead of just assuming that trans, when someone says trans, they're referring to someone transracial instead of someone transgender? Because for a while now, when we use that term colloquially, trans usually means transgender, someone who has changed gender and has had dysphoria. So I already didn't agree with that beginning part, but let's get on to the second part so then I can tell you about what happened in class. So this second part says, a fundamental aspect of our editorial vision for this special issue of Women's Studies Quarterly is that neither gender nor any of the other suffixes of trans can be understood in isolation, that the lines implied by the very concept of trans are moving targets simultaneously composed of multiple determinants. Transing, in short, is a practice that takes place within as well as across or between gendered spaces. It is a practice that assembles gender into contingent structures of association with other attributes of bodily being, and that allows for their reassembly. Transing can function as a disciplinary tool when the stigma associated with the lack or loss of gender status threatens social unintelligibility, coercive normalization, or even bodily extermination. It can also function as an escape vector, line of flight, or pathway toward liberation. A fundamental question we would like to pose is, what kinds of intellectual labor can we begin to perform through the critical deployment of trans operations and movements? Those of us schooled in the humanities and social sciences have become familiar over the past 20 years or so with queering things. How might we likewise decide to critically trans our world?
What English, motherfucker, do you speak it?
So, one of the main things that happens in queer theory is that we queer things. And when they say queer things, they mean look at things through a queer lens, or kind of sometimes, in my personal opinion, force a queer lens, because sometimes homosexuality, anything of the LGBTQ spectrum happens in what we're reading and is relevant, and sometimes it's not. I just think that is a reality we have to accept, and in the same way, sometimes trans is part of the narrative of whatever we're reading, and sometimes it's not. So transing the world and queering the world is a little bit problematic to me, as they would like to use the term, but I digress. Based on those two things I read to you, I realized that it's very confusing and very dense, which is a very common theme throughout queer theory texts, but mainly the idea is that we shouldn't limit the meaning of trans to transgender, and that we should be more open and make it more abstract, I guess, than concrete with the image of a transgender person in our head when we say the word trans. when it came to discussing the whole term trans and making it more, I guess, abstract and less defined of a term, I said that I didn't think it was a good idea to do that because I thought it would cause a lot of confusion. Especially because imagine if you and even just two other people are using the same word but are associating completely different meanings with it. And I was saying that it would be annoying to continuously use the word trans and then have someone be like, oh, what trans are you talking about? Or every time when you start a conversation and you're talking about trans things, you have to preface every time saying, oh, I'm not talking about transgender people, I'm talking about transracial people. And I was saying it's kind of contradictory because the point of having a word is for that word to have a meaning and for that meaning to be specific enough, right? If we say that trans now refers to pretty much anything that has trans as a prefix, that becomes complicated because every time we're having a conversation or every time some academic writes a paper, they need to put their whole definition of what it means to be trans or what they perceive trans to mean. Obviously, my nemesis was not a fan of this argument, and he told me that, well, he told the class, that prefacing things is something we already do, so what's the big deal if we have to preface more? And he actually kind of likes prefacing, and he pretty much was saying that prefacing wasn't a problem and that people would just have to adjust themselves, which I can understand in a sense, but I'm like, if you can simplify something, why would you opt out of simplifying it and on the contrary, opting into complicating it? Especially if, let's see this from the point of view of someone who's an SJW, that works directly against your agenda. Because when people are saying that there are 72 genders or whatever the fuck, people argue against that because it's like, hey, you can't just make things up and decide that that's a rule, right? Similarly with this word, you can't just say, oh, trans doesn't only refer to transgender people anymore and refers to transracial, transgenic, trans whatever. You can't just decide that and make that a rule because most people are going to see trans as transgender because that's what it's meant. And that's what's been colloquially used for a while. So then we moved on to the bathroom topic.
Someone complained that the men's room is whites only. Stanley, you know that's not true.
I didn't say that.
And why is there a picture of a white man on the door?
And although I'm really tired of the bathroom argument of like, oh, these are women's bathrooms, these are men's bathrooms, these are non-binary, these are transgender, these are gender neutral, like, I'm kind of over all of that, but this is when my nemesis and I, once again, went head to head. We were talking about bathrooms on campus, and apparently our library has bathrooms that are, I think they're gender neutral or gender non-conforming or something like that. Essentially bathrooms to say that they're for everyone, right? And I don't really have a problem with that. I've never been very pressed about the whole idea of bathrooms. I don't really care as long as there's someone where I can go to the bathroom. I don't care. So anyways, my nemesis was saying that it would be a good idea to have queer bathrooms.
Hey! Stop it. Stop it. Okay.
Which I was like, what the fuck would that even entail, you know? And it's a complicated question because some people might be considered queer by others, but what if they don't consider themselves queer? So does that mean they can't go into that bathroom? And what if they don't like the term queer and don't like the reclaiming of it and think it's offensive? Or what if people just don't want the term queer, even if they are queer, put upon them like that? I then said that I thought that the best thing to do for bathrooms was either to have your classic men-women bathrooms and then have other, so like anyone who identifies as other can go into those bathrooms, or to just have completely gender-neutral bathrooms where it just says bathroom and everyone goes into those bathrooms. I don't really have a problem with that as long as there's separate stalls and that's it. I don't really see the big deal, especially in terms of the changing table. I know that that was a big part of the discourse. In terms of the bathrooms where there were like single dads that didn't have a changing table to change their kids' nappies or whatever. So in having just one bathroom, you could just put the changing tables there and there would be no real politics involved with like who can use the changing table for their kids or who's allowed to have kids and so forth. However, this again received a response from my nemesis where he was claiming that having queer bathrooms is more accepting and more inclusive and I guess more intersectional because when does queer theory not use the term intersectional? To which myself and a couple of other people were saying, well, you know, some people don't really want to identify as that. And on top of that, some people are still not comfortable with that. And a friend of mine made an argument referring to the fact that even people in her family were not comfortable with that. And even some people in my family were still not comfortable with that because their connotation of the word queer was still very negative and still based on the one of the past, I guess, or the non-reclaimed one. And I see it all the time on Tumblr, I see on all kinds of social media that there's still not, a lot of people are still not okay with the term queer. And Sam's response was pretty much, I don't care if people are uncomfortable, maybe it's good that they're uncomfortable, why should we care about their comfort? Which I think is a very strange argument to make, because the whole point of making queer bathrooms is to make queer people feel more comfortable. So the fact that you're saying that you don't care about other people being comfortable is a little bit hypocritical, but that's Sam. Anyways, a lot of the class actually participated in this discussion, which was kind of surprising to me because a lot of the times there isn't so much of a confrontation or opposing sides as much as there is just one person saying something and everyone else agreeing. But that was pretty much what happened in queer theory this time. It wasn't as crazy, but it was still pretty wild to hear that a person wants queer bathrooms yet doesn't care if queer makes other people comfortable, while they want to make queer bathrooms to make queer people comfortable. Right? There's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance there, I think. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think about all of this. The whole bathroom debate I know is kind of a big deal for a lot of people, so let me know what you think about that. Thank you to my patrons as always, and let's get into the fan art.